Yeah, my name is Marc Benkoff. I'm from the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan.
See how we like this? Hold up. Yeah, West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy, these guys I come out of. OG Stilo, we know. Gotta be the homie Kiloz. Yeah, West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy, these guys I come out of. OG Stilo, we know. Gotta be the homie Kiloz. You see that 6'4"?
I've been into low riding now for about 16 years, almost 17 years. I've been into classic cars since 2000. Started with just muscle cars, classic Chevys, but I always wanted a lowrider, but I didn't personally have the means myself physically to build a car like that, and I didn't really know there were nice cars like that available, around the Midwest or, in Michigan specifically. And then I was at a cruise in one of the cruises here called the Gratiot Cruise in 2003, and I was walking down the street and I heard a car with bass. So as you do when you hear a car with bass, you turn around and see what it was. And it was this candy metal flake, gold, chromed out 64 convertible. And I was like blown away. I thought for sure it had to have come from LA. So I kind of stopped with one of my boys and we just waited for it to pull up. And it ended up that it was Tommy Cavataio from Show and Go. I didn't know who he was at the time. And he had just built that car. So after talking to him for a few minutes, I realized, he built that car himself, and he worked at Show and Go, and they had the capability to build cars like that, and they were building cars like that. And that was kind of it. And that was in 2003. So I still had a couple more classic cars, and about 3 more years, almost 4 years went by, and I had sold my last classic Camaro, and I bought a 62 Impala. And I was looking, it already had air ride on it. And I wasn't quite ready yet for hydraulics. So I was looking for somebody to kind of change the air ride setup around because it was a nitrogen tank setup. It was just a huge, ugly, big tank. It was a pain. So through Lay It Low in Michigan Riders, I found Jimmy from Show and Go. And I still didn't even remember putting 2 and 2 together between him and Tommy. And he was just hit me up and was like, come up to the shop, bring the car, and we'll give you a quote to do what you want to do. And there was just something about it. The first time I stepped into Show and Go, I just kind of instantly became friends with Jimmy and Tommy. And then we became super close and traveled together, went to car shows together, the Super Show. I joined the club with them. And then after seeing their cars, then I wanted a hydraulic car. And it was either switch the 62 to hydraulics, but I really wanted a 61. So that was kind of where that went. But I've been just cruising and hanging out, right around this area. I'm lucky to live right off of Woodward Avenue. And even my parents, when they were in their teens, were cruising Woodward Avenue every weekend, just up and down Woodward, like 8, 9, 10 miles back and forth all night. And then when I kind of got into it with my classic cars on the weekends, Fridays and Saturdays, people would just go out there and hang out. And at the time, I was like the youngest one out there with the classic muscle car. And then when I finally started hitting Woodward with a lowrider, there really wasn't a ton of lowriders out on Woodward. I kind of brought, I think, more people out because I would start hanging out. The more friends I would make in lowriding around the city, I would kind of try to start getting people to come out to Woodward, more and more often. And then, so I mean, the only Woodward Dream Cruise I've ever missed was the first one because I was living in another state, and we love it. It's become a family thing. We bring the kids, my wife, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, they both have classic cars. Now, technically, because of by marriage, I'm related to Tommy. I'm married to his first cousin, and so it's like a whole, big family thing every year that we do, and we rent a bunch of spaces and just kind of, do that. So then in 2008, I found my 61 convertible out. It was in LA, and it was already a frame-off car. It was pretty clean, so I bought that. It got to Detroit. We were just planning on just doing a little bit of silver leafing and swapping frames, and that was it because the car was already chromed out, didn't really need anything. And then when it got here, because I bought it sight unseen, discovered that the paint job, the car was bone solid, and it wasn't a conversion or anything like that, but the paint job just wasn't what I was looking for. It didn't look wet. So the first thing Jimmy did was basically sanded the whole car down, and then we, excuse me, went from there. And it was just crazy because after watching and seeing Jimmy and Tommy's cars that were totally chromed out, and a lot of the other cars in Detroit, more and more cars were starting to be chromed out. Little bit of patterns, not too much up here yet. But, you know, when I wanted that car, I didn't want any patterns. I wanted to be, you know, Jimmy and Tommy, they were the ones who had the full patterned out, crazy hopper style show, whatever, hoppers. And I wanted to kind of be the more like behind the scenes, quiet, not loud with my car. And that car was a great car. I mean, Jimmy did a great job on the paint job. Tommy did a great job on the assembly. Jimmy put the setup together, did all the welding. And it was a great car, and I really had no intentions on selling it. I was about to actually put a new top on it with a gangster window and do an LS swap. And then somebody on Instagram kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and that was it. Came, picked it up, and it went. So then I was looking for a car, and then I really wanted a car with a patterned roof. And I had been following Candy and Chrome's work since pretty much he got started. And I bought the 58, and I already knew, and you know, I had an idea in mind what I wanted. And I booked with him to fly out. I flew him out here. He was out here for 2 weeks, and I pretty much let him do whatever he wanted. My only stipulation was I had to pick all the colors. And I'm a painting contractor, a custom residential painting contractor by trade. So I know my colors, and I knew exactly color-wise what I wanted. I wanted every color from the inside the car brought onto the roof and whatever other patterns we did. And he was awesome to work with. He took my feedback. I think he was probably happy to leave Detroit. By the time we were done, I think I drove him crazy. But all in all, we got along great. He did a fantastic job. I couldn't be happier with the way it came out. And a lot of people think I'm crazy from going from a convertible to a hardtop, but you can't do this to a convertible. At least somebody hasn't done it yet. I'm sure one day somebody's going to build a convertible with some kind of patterned vinyl roof or something. But yeah, I love it. I love it. I don't have the sun beating down on my head anymore. Got air conditioning in the car, and it's just a more comfortable car to drive. The setup, I never really got into the hop game. I always appreciated it, and I always supported it. It was never for me personally to do it with my car. I think we only hopped my 61 2 or 3 times, and that was it. But when I built this car more for comfort. 2 pumps, 4 batteries, no frame wrap, just some reinforced extended control arms in the front, and it still rides great. We're still dialing in a little bit, but for the most part, the car drives great. My wife can jump in, drive it anywhere. And yeah, no, it's been great. So yeah, back in 07, when I first went down to Show and Go, I was like, because I'm from the suburbs. I'm in the city a lot, but usually downtown or on Jefferson by the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, you know, around that area. But Show and Go is on the east side of Detroit, in probably one of the worst neighborhoods on the east side of Detroit. And the first time I went down there, I was like terrified. I was terrified. I was driving a nice Impala. I had never been in that area before. It's right off the freeway, so that was good. But and now I feel totally comfortable. I've been going down there for 16 years or more, and it's like kind of like my second home. I'm at the shop probably at least 2-3 times a week. My kids come down there, and it was like, once you step into the shop, it's like an oasis. And we always joke around and say it would have made a great reality show, because it's almost like, and I'm sure a lot of other shops are like this too, but it's almost like the movie Barbershop. There's regulars that are there on and off every single day. People come, people go. A lot of the employees that have been there, unless they've passed away, and aside from Jimmy, some have passed away. Rick, he was awesome. He was instrumental in doing a lot of the work on this when I got it, and a couple other guys. But just everybody there, it's like a family. It's a big, just crazy, dysfunctional, awesome family. And people come down there. Tommy lets people, that he's friends with, work on their own stuff. I take my truck down there. I take the car. I mean, Tommy will literally give anybody the shirt off his back. And Tommy can fix anything. He'll do whatever it takes to keep your car off a trailer or a tow truck or a flatbed. And it's just awesome. I just love the shop. And hopefully, as the area actually has gotten better over the years, and hopefully it'll keep getting better. Tommy bought the shop. Jimmy was renting it. He owned the business, but he was renting the building. And the building actually was a famous Dodge dealer in the early 1900s. You could see it online in the early 20s. It was called Reno Brothers Dodge. And through the years, in the early 80s, Reno closed. And then it was a couple other little shops, a collision shop, then something else. And then Jimmy finally found it with his dad, and they ended up taking it over. But then when Jimmy passed away, Tommy was kind of trying to figure out what he wanted to do. And at the same time, the owner of the building passed away. He was an old guy. And he ended up buying the building. It's like, I think the building is 25,000 square feet. So it's a good sized building. And it needed a lot of repair. The roof needed repair. The shop was a mess. It just needed a lot of work. And Tommy, since he's bought that building, has just, it's incredible what he's done and what he continues to do to make, the building and the business just a better business. He's not building as many lowriders out of there anymore. It's more collision, but they're still doing custom paint jobs. He brought somebody in who's actually renting space, a great guy, Dave Kelmise, who owns Consider It Fixed. He has a Malibu race car that they're actually at the track today racing and down in Ohio. Builds a lot of donks, does a ton of LS swaps. And Tommy did my LS swap, but Dave kind of stepped in a few different times when we had a couple questions. So he was really instrumental in getting my car set up the way it is now, motor-wise. But yeah, it's been great. So now Dave is kind of in the Show and Go family, and we're kind of in the Consider It Fixed family. And it's been awesome. So I'm hoping my next car, I'm keeping this one, but I really want to get a donk. I want to put together a donk next. And I don't know if I will. It's totally different now, and it's so expensive. So who knows if that'll happen, but maybe one day if I find the right car, I will definitely do that. And as far as the club, when we decided to join Uso, it was pretty much a no-brainer. We had been in another situation, and we kind of took it easy for a while and weren't sure if we wanted to be solo or not. And while Jimmy was sick, before he passed away, we talked a lot about joining Uso. And really, our plan was, when Jimmy's 59 rag was done, is when we were going to join Uso. Jimmy wanted to, we were planning on it, Tommy was on board, and that was the plan. Because they had actually met Kita years before, like probably back in 2003, I'm thinking they probably met Kita in Chicago, I believe. And they were actually going to prospect out of Chicago. And for whatever reason, one thing or another, nothing bad or negative, they just decided to not join Uso at that time. But when we were ready, it was a no-brainer. Kita, as everybody knows who's ever met Kita, the minute you meet him, you feel like you've known him forever, and he treats you like he's known you forever. And one of my fondest memories, and I'm so glad we did this, is one of our first, it might have been our first regional, well, no, because there was a Uso chapter here already, I'm sorry. One of the first, since we were in the club, since we were in Uso, one of our first regionals, we flew Kita out here for the weekend. And it just so happened that weekend, there was a cruise, it's called the Downriver Cruise on 4th Street. So we took Kita, and I just got to hang out with him for hours. He rode with me for a while, and we just parked, a bunch of people met up with us too from other clubs and Majestics and Good Times, and some other big clubs were with us. And we were just hanging out, and Kita looked at me, and he's like, brother, I don't just love lowriders. He's like, I'm loving this right now. He's like, I just love cars, and I just love seeing the cultures and the classic cars and new cars, whatever, no matter where I go. And he just had a killer time that weekend. And then luckily, one of my club brothers got to do an interview with Kita in my garage, in my old house, behind my 61. And it's kind of become a famous picture, related to Kita. When Eric Howard did this interview with him, that was a great interview. And it was just great spending time kind of one-on-one, a small group after the picnic at my house. And it was a pleasure and a privilege to have Kita at our house hanging out. And he just we miss him terribly. And he got sick actually real shortly after our picnic, but I got to see him quite a few more times afterwards. And I mean, he's just missed by everybody in the club, and he was a legend. So yeah, the lowriding scene in Detroit has been interesting. When I got into it, there were a lot more beefs between, and I don't know if it was because of Lay It Low or whatever it was, there were a lot more beefs between clubs. But even still, there were a lot more like get-togethers, and people were hanging out a lot more together and doing a lot more riding, I think, than now. But as we've gotten older, and I'm older now, and I just don't have as much time as I used to, there is a younger scene that's coming up right now. But the younger scene in lowriding is just different. They kind of do different things than we do, and I kind of more like going to car shows, not like judged events so much. I just like cruises. I just love just taking my car out, talking to other people with cars. And the lowriding scene, I think it kind of ebbs and flows. There are times when the lowrider scene is big and you hear about it and you see a lot of people buying cars and stuff. But then, and I kind of feel like that we're in a little bit of that right now, where it's kind of more of the ebb, where not as many people are getting into it. I think a lot of that is the expense to build a car now, and I talk about this probably too much, with Tommy and some of my other friends. It's like, if I had to build this car right now from scratch, I couldn't afford to build it, flat out. It is ridiculous how expensive things have got, and I think that that's a major deterrent to the younger kids that really want to get into it. And now with social media, everybody wants to start at the top. They want to start with a top of the line, Impala, 58, 59, 64 rag, 61 rag, whatever. And sometimes you got to walk before you run. Some people are lucky and they could start out with a nice 62 or whatever, and like I was able to do, but I was already a little bit older and working. If I was younger and I had gotten into it and met them sooner, yeah, I probably would have started with a Cutlass, Monte Carlo, G-Body, something, and kind of worked my way up, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are some that are doing it. We don't really hang out with that crowd as much because I feel just like age-wise, we don't have as much in common with them. But I think, hopefully people will be inspired and people will see these cars and that it is possible, and more people will get into it, and lowriding will be a lot more popular in this area again. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. See how we lay this? Hold up. Me and West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy equal as I come out of OG Stilo. We know, gotta be the homie Kiloz. Me and West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy equal as I come out of OG Stilo. We know, gotta be the homie Kiloz. You see that 6'4", you see that setup. Pesco's may take a while to walk, but she gon' let up. Yeah, they riding clean, but let me ask you this: are they riding 6'4s with trues and 8 decks? Kiloz, the youngin' with that vet that I know skilo. Come out, I capturing the beauty of all the vehicles. I meant to say it, I'm fly. Either way, it's clean, so Spiggity been lying. You know what I mean, love. Me and West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy equal as I come out of OG Stilo. We know, gotta be the homie Kiloz. Me and West Coast, how I keep it G. Yeah, I pulled up on 4 wheels, but I'ma leave on 3. See that boy equal as I come out of OG Stilo. We know, gotta be the homie Kiloz.